Welcome, everyone. I guess announcements. We now have an Apple developer account, so that's pretty cool. I haven't done anything with it, but it exists. And that's maybe the biggest announcement. I guess we cut a CVE. That was a thing. Where's the CVE that we cut? I don't even know. Anyhow, there it is. Yeah, we released a CVE as well. Is this one public yet? Sorry. Oh, not public yet. Anyhow, this got discussed a bunch on Slack. This is there's a PR 6433 that fixed like a link against OpenSSL. I don't know. Someone other than me probably knows a bunch more about this. It's merged. It'll be fixed in the next release. Stefano, you fixed this. Go you.
Yeah, I can say there were a couple of problems there. Basically, there was a possible privileges escalation due to the fact that OpenSSL was depending on zlib, a dynamic library, which was zlib.dll on Windows. And the first fix was to remove that dependency. But we also noticed that we do make use of the load library API in Windows with relative paths, which means that when load library is used with relative paths to load DLLs, they could be loaded from insecure places because the environment variable path is used among other things in the search path. So the second part of the fix basically try to remove our usage of load library and use a safer API which checks for the path to be full instead of relative, and yeah.
Well, I think
yeah,
that was actually addressed by number 6458, in which Ted added the option to only load libraries from the system32 path. So I think it still doesn't require having absolute paths, but it added some safety there.
Anyhow, random announcements. So it was great. Any other announcements or highlights people want to bring up?
I think a cool thing here too is that security advisory was driven through GitHub. So in the future, we can assign our own CVEs if there are vulnerabilities just through the GitHub API. You go to the security tab, and if you're a project contributor, you can go to advisories, create an advisory, which we could also backfill all of our previous ones there too. And then there's a button after you create it to request a CVE, which GitHub will review and give to you. And then later when like you're ready to release this, there's a button to say like publish, and so all the details go publicly. So what will happen when we press that, which like there's nothing blocking us pressing it right now, is the security tab at the top, which has a 0, will go to 1, which is why I think it's important to backfill all of them, because like 1 doesn't really represent the number of security vulnerabilities that we've had.
Do we have a list of them?
Yes, someone maintained a list. I'm not sure who put all that together, but it's really well documented.
It should just be as easy as going to a CVE database, right? Searching Osquery.
My experience with the CVE database is that their metadata is not very good. It might be that good, but I don't know.
Maybe we should create an issue to do that. Like a foundation or something.
There is a list on the security policy page of our past CVEs or major security issues. I'll link it in the chat here.
Yeah, there's a security MD file, which also contains a list, which probably is what is shown there.
Okay, well, it seems like there's some reasonable work for replacing security.md with the GitHub security functionality. So either we can create an issue or what. So awesome. Other announcements? Okay.
Related to the Apple developer account, is there a plan to add contributors as developer team members? Is like an Apple developer account team, right?
Correct. It is an organization. I think right now, Gruba and I probably are the only people on it. I'm happy to add people as it seems reasonable and appropriate to do so.
Okay. There's a couple of things that came up while I was doing an endpoint security signing and notarizing exercise with Alessandro, which is that the team owner or the account owner has to apply for endpoint security, and then there's a big wait time for that, and then when you get it, team members can then at least do developer signing on their local system without disabling SIP, and they can test out and develop endpoint security stuff. And they won't have the ability to code sign for distribution. So it's safe enough, to add people to the team that way. And the admins or whoever controls the distribution keys can still be like the single point of release engineering, or however you want to protect those keys and signing certificates. But those just seem like next steps for the Apple developer account. So I just wanted to see what you thought.
So my thought was that we should not apply for endpoint security until we've at least used it to sign one thing, but maybe that's the wrong attitude. And if you think otherwise, I'm happy. Yes, we should talk about this. It was great. I wasn't sure what Apple's internal criteria was, so I wasn't sure if it was reasonable for us to say, great, now that we have this, let's immediately request this, or if we should wait a month. Do you have any insight?
I do. It's completely opaque. So that's the insight. They don't respond or give you any information about your status while you're approving. And it looks like, in my opinion, we have a well-established tool with a relevant use case, and maybe one of the best, most justifiable use cases. And it wouldn't probably have any issue in approval. It might take a interminable amount of time, and that's why I wanted to bring it up early. But since Charvel's going to discuss what he's doing already, we could also point to that and say, look, we're prototyping it, but we need to have signing in order to ship anything.
Okay, I'll figure out how to apply to that, or we'll pay. We can do it offline from this.
It's a brief form. It really, you don't need to say much.
Yeah, send it to me in Slack or something.
I really can't because I'm not a team owner. But if you can find it,
okay,
it's hidden amongst that.
Yep.
Okay.
In the form, there's a little blurb why do you want this entitlement, kind of, and I think it's reasonable to say we develop Osquery. Here's the link. Here's the GitHub page. Give us the entitlement, kind of.
Exactly.
Usually like to start this by saying if anyone from the community has anything they want to raise. We've got a couple of PRs and issues that people have contributed, but I don't know if anyone wants to bring anything else up now, ask any questions. Anyone stuck on anything? And anyone want to raise anything? Okay, well, the things people have suggested, we've got issue 4787, schema consistency question.
This is me. Yeah, I was in the backlog this weekend and looking at things that said triage on them. And this was, I addressed a couple, made a couple PRs. This one's an easy one though, because it seems like a reasonable request. There's a table that breaks up a process in command line and arguments as separate columns. And then there's tables that just have them all in one field. I prefer having them broken out, but we could at least be consistent across our tables.
My gut, I would generally also prefer them broken out, unless the underlying API blurs them together, and then maybe it's less clear.
I think we have all the necessary functions to just do an easy split. They're being used in one table only.
So I was looking at something earlier, system calls for exec_ve_at, where you're passing like a file descriptor that could have a certain path behind it, but the argv0 is kind of user defined there. So the process executable name and what would show up in the command line don't actually equal each other necessarily. I want to make sure that we still support that being the case in those weird cases.
I mean, so the particular table in question here is the Windows Services table, right? Which I assume is going to be really similar to like the sc.exe QC output or something.
Yeah, I don't have
know.
any opinions on that table, so that's fine.
I was just in the startup items table, and it breaks out the arguments, and it's a separate column. I guess if I were to look at why to do one or the other, getting away from just like the preference, I'd like to see them broken out. But I think like you have to have a justification, and maybe it's easier one way or another to match a SQL query. You know, if you're searching for invocations of a particular process, maybe you want to do that without having to somehow collect all of the ones with a substring, you know, and then strip off the arguments. But this is how Osquery is used, and so I guess people that have used this table could maybe chime in.
I mean, I'm on board with such a change, and I think that anyone who relies on the old behavior could just change their SQL to concatenate the strings and get the old behavior again. But I think for most people, this would be a more intuitive behavior.
I think it's reasonable to split them, and I think if we could discuss whether or not sort of what the process is for breaking changes, because it is basically a SQL breaking change, even if we think it's the right one. I suspect we're going to cut a 5.0 relatively soon, for reasons to agenda items down. So if we wanted to consider it a breaking change and stick it in a 5.0, that wouldn't be bad.
Yeah, I mean, I've always had this opinion long term. More interested in the discussion of how we do breaking changes, as opposed to doing them or not doing in specific cases. And we need to at some point figure that discussion out. There's been a few proposals in the past, like having version tables or some other thing, but it comes up a lot that we intend to change the schema or introduce new fields, and depending on how people use Osquery, it ends up breaking them.
My sense is that we would accept a PR to split this with this particular table, and that most of our utilization has it split into two columns. And we still don't have a good answer for breaking changes, so we'll probably, until someone gets excited to tackle that, we'll just kind of keep them ad hoc, I guess. Anyone else on that? Mike, do you have anything else you want to raise on this?
No, that's all on this.
Okay. Charvel put up a PR 6467, which is a first pass at endpoint security. So that's pretty exciting. Thanks, Charvel.
Yeah, so this implements endpoint security-based process events table on macOS. It works on Catalina, of course, but it also compiles on Mojave and older. And if it's compiled on Catalina, it'll still run on Mojave and older. This requires setting the macOS minimum deployment target. I don't know what the exact flag is, but it requires setting that to whatever 10.12, 10.11, whatever we have. Because it uses Apple's availability macros to like figure out runtime, checking if these APIs are available and if these symbols are in place or not. And it seems like Azure is not picking that up, and I'll need to investigate.
So we currently set the OS X deployment target to 10.11. At least we're supposed to.
Yeah. And I tested that out locally on a couple of machines and on VM, and it works. But I'm not sure why that doesn't seem to work on Azure, so I might need some help with that. Other than that, it requires entitlements to be able to play around with it. And if anyone wants to test it locally, it requires currently disabling system integrity protection, ideally spinning up a VM instead of doing it on your own machine.
So
from that, Alessandro took a quick look at it, and I need to batch up events, so I'll work on that the next day or so.
Yeah, I only took a quick look at it, sorry. There's
no worries.
also another thing that is worth changing. The platform binary flag you get from endpoint security is not reliable.
Yeah, it's a little bit tricky, right? Because when it forks, it inherits the parent's one, and it
Yeah,
no
exactly.
longer, yeah, I noticed that one. Do you have any opinions on how to deal with that?
I wouldn't include it because it
You
is tricky to verify that.
Yeah.
I mean, when you receive the notification, you're still before the exec
Yeah,
VE.
before
So
exactly.
the code sections are not mapped yet, and there is no way to verify if that flag is either true or false.
Yeah.
You would have to check for the code signature.
Yeah, and that's expensive, and we already have a signature table to do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have maybe a different question. We've touched on this in past times, which is like, do we have any idea about how we want to sort of integrate the endpoint security framework with the BSM framework, or whatever the other sort of eventing frameworks are going forward, right? This is a different table name, so we don't quite have that same migration, but that also means that you could imagine your 10.16 machine needing a different query to get process events than your 10.14 machine, or whatever else. So like, how do we, like, this is again calling to mind the table versioning a little bit. Like, how do we have any idea how we want to deal with that?
Speaking about OpenBSM, the biggest issue here is that there are many people compiling Osquery on their own, and I cannot see them easily deploying endpoint security. So I would expect most of those people to keep using the OpenBSM-based tables. Other than that, yeah, we can maybe see if... so I didn't check all the columns, comparing them to the OpenBSM ones, but I think they should be mostly the same.
I guess some of where I'm going is like, do we see these as being different tables, or do we see these as being a configuration option for what sort of the back end is backing a table?
Oh, I see now.
Well, even a single release, if it's going to continue supporting 10.14, can't be solely based on endpoint security. So I think you want to compile with support for both and somehow either have them separate tables or have the table choose the best available option at runtime.
Or a configuration parameter.
A runtime configuration parameter?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like
yeah.
I don't know what makes sense. I'm leery of things that have different tables because, you know, if you're supporting a heterogeneous environment, like there's sort of no really good answer, right? Because you're like, oh, well,
you don't want to issue two queries, right?
I don't issue two queries, but also I want to maybe test different implementations. So like, how do we manage that? And is like, is it some hideous table option, like an aware clause? Like, I don't know what we want to do.
Yeah, maybe a runtime configuration flag then, which overrides the modern choice. Like maybe it defaults to endpoint security if available, maintaining the schema. And then if you don't want, for some reason, to use that because you've recompiled and don't have that entitlement anymore, you can override it at runtime. Something like that.
Is there a reason we wouldn't prefer having separate tables for separate sources? I mean, all of these, I could see a table just for process events and then having different backends, but I suspect that the folks interested in this telemetry are very conscious of the sources and would probably prefer to just have everything that a specific source exposes and just say, you know, give me the endpoint security process events or, yeah.
So I can talk about BPF since I am implementing the process events table. And the reason I went with a secondary table is that audit and BPF have several differences in how accurate your data can be. In this case, however, it seems like the BSM and the endpoint security tables can both provide roughly the same data with the same accuracy. So I think it would make sense to select the source with a flag or something and switch between the two. Now, I don't know how common it is on macOS to have a fleet that has several different versions, one where you have endpoint security, one where you have not. But we also have versions that may have been compiled manually with no entitlement. So we have three cases, and it would be nice to have the endpoint security as a default and BSM as a fallback.
Are there, as we develop more in endpoint security, we may see divergence with BSM. So like this table might be a place where we see obvious overlap, but that might not be true for the next table. I don't know how that changes anything. But.
Yeah. So I'm not sure I'm not really familiar with OpenBSM. I'm not sure whether it is something more similar to audit, where you can trace system calls or not. If that is the case, then yeah, we could see things go different ways if we start implementing additional system calls.
It's very similar, and you can do tracing of system calls.
I see.
Yeah, I think we should probably poll more people, chew on it. I don't think we need an answer right now. Just, I feel like it's a good question, I think, for us to think about, right? Because I can definitely imagine a time when Apple has de-supported OpenBSM, and then like, what do we have?
Yeah. To be fair, it's I mean, we also have several tables based on audit that trace other system calls. And I mean, I don't think we would ever change the processes table by adding new functionality based on OpenBSM. We would probably spawn different tables.
Oh, maybe different tables then.
speaking of OpenBSM, I think Nishant and myself are taking a critical eye into the implementation right now, and we could use some help reviewing. I think there's one more diff open. There's an issue, a related issue about OpenBSM crashing, which I guess is like a thing that happens commonly, and it's able to recover from its crash state. But it seems like Osquery doesn't handle the recovery. I'm not exactly sure, but I'm not exactly sure the specifics of what's happening here. But the person who opened the issue has a thread open with Apple where they're deep diving. So as soon as that's resolved, maybe we can get some follow-ups and make some improvements. I noticed the OpenBSM implementation was pretty like bare bones. Seems like we added it, but didn't spend a lot of time like honing it. So the second pass that Nishant and myself made is like bringing it closer to a first-class citizen from Osquery's perspective. I imagine that like after we do this and roll it out, people give us feedback, we'll have to make some more improvements to it too.
If you happen to have a PR number you want me to link to this, I'm happy to link them.
Yeah.
Is this the polling one?
It is, yeah.
Okay,
64,
I found it. Yeah. And you said more eyes there would be good?
Yeah, another eye. Like I don't expect someone to jump into it and be an expert on OpenBSM, but at least look at the code and see if it's reasonable, ask some questions. And if you have the ability to review, please render a decision.
Okay.
Is there any way to configure OpenBSM without changing system files?
Already merged. Yep. We just added
Nice.
that. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, because I once made a mistake on my machine on that configuration file, and I could no longer log into the session. It wasn't fun.
Gee, dang. I also noticed the documentation we have about how to update it turns OpenBSM into this really loud pipe because we turn on AD, which is like a category of rules that we want to consume, but we don't actually use any of those categories in our implementations. And one of these in the AD category is any syscall was called. So you can imagine how loud that is, and we're just dropping all those events to the floor. So this PR also updates our documentation.
Oh, great to hear that that one merged. I think I remember talk about that in the last office hours.
Speaking of crashes, calling ES delete client, which is the API to delete the endpoint security client on 10.15 to 10.15.3 sometimes crashes. I think there might be a radar there.
I mean, is the takeaway there that just running ES tables on something in that range is apt to be buggy?
So I haven't found any crash with that API. I've been playing with it for a while now. Are you sure that the client is being deleted after the... Because, I mean, you could get notifications from the framework while you're deleting the client, or even after.
So it kind of depends. Are you giving it full disk access? I think it's related to that in the TCC.
I see. I don't think I can run it without full disk access permission.
So you can run it without full disk access, but the flip side is that this is crashing on earlier than 10.15.4. I might have a reproducible 10-line thing. I can send it over tomorrow. You can play around with it if you want.
Oh yeah, fine. I mean, I was just curious. And yeah, I did notice some inaccuracies, like the platform is platform binary flag. So
Yeah, I ran across that too a little bit. So I think a little bit is, did you experience that with like a production entitlement? I don't know what to call it. Or were you just signing it yourself?
so I was initially working on a VM with SIP disabled. We do have an entitlement now, and we are using we tried both with local signing and with a distribution certificate.
Okay.
I haven't seen this issue so far.
Okay, I think it might be related to entitlement as well.
It wasn't fun to set it up. Mike did. I just gave up.
Yeah, it's a little bit long process.
Oh, I mean, after we did get the entitlement, I wasn't able to correctly set up on Xcode. There was always something that was not working correctly.
Do you need Xcode?
Yeah, it was for another project. Of course, the CMake version with a custom target calling CodeSign would just work perfectly.
CodeSign should just
up in Xcode was not fun.
CodeSign should just be a simple command line. You shouldn't need Xcode for it.
Yes, you can run code sign, but when the code sign when the code signature has to be verified, project structure and small metadata problems can cause a signature verification failure, and it doesn't really give you a good error. We went around a lot on this. I know we like CMake a lot, so we wouldn't abandon it easily.
I'm giving you a lot of side eye here.
But we'd love to see it work with CMake.
What
so
exactly
you know,
wasn't working?
Wow,
it wasn't Osquery.
It's a long discussion. We'll maybe take that offline.
We can take this offline. I say this because, right, I sign a lot of things. I have no Xcode in my pipelines.
I hate the thing, really. It's so buggy.
Yeah, I mean, if you figure out the entitlements file correct, then you can use CodeSign, whatever. The initial figuring out takes a while, but it should work just fine once you got the correct entitlements file from Xcode.
Yeah, there's an entitlements file in Charvel's PR, so. Yeah, I don't know if people have other stuff about this crash here, maybe. I don't know. I think this crash and some of this discussion just makes me think the endpoint security framework still feels a little bit rough around the edges.
Yeah, totally is.
We filed some bugs, well, unrelated to this crash, although. So like one thing that you opt in when you use endpoint security framework is that there's no way to automatically remove Osquery. So if you're relying on deployment that would downgrade a version or something, with endpoint security, there's a GUI prompt that the user has to click saying that a system extension is getting removed, which is something that I'm complaining to Apple through our official channels right now, but we're running into this with Santa, where you have to, if you're doing like a gradual rollout of a system extension, you have to be very careful and to always just roll forward and ensure that you never want to actually uninstall it from any computer, because that requires the user to do things. So that's one consideration to using endpoint security or adding endpoint security to Osquery itself.
Isn't system extension a different entitlement, though? Loading and unloading a system extension?
So they're related because the only way to get the endpoint security binary is to have the system extension. Like the endpoint security framework manifests itself as a system extension. Just like if I was writing a DNS proxy, like that would be another type of system extension. And so they all have the system extension entitlement for loading and unloading the extension from the system. And then the actual implementation is, your code. But there's some wrapper code specifically for loading and replacing extensions, and that's the system extension framework. Santa does this. You can take a look in the Objective-C code. I also have some Swift examples for doing this. And at Objective by the Sea, there's a talk from Scott Knight, I think works at Carbon Black now. But he talks through an example endpoint security tool and how it interacts with the system extensions framework.
Sounds messy.
There's some sense to it, but it's very, yeah, I suspect that rolling this out is going to cause, well, if you added it to Osquery, you have to be careful about how you roll it out. Like it's not going to be invisible to a lot of people because they'll get GUI prompts for things.
Kind of implies that we may not want to sign with that until we're pretty sure, until like, I don't know what.
Well, it happens at runtime, but the user, like it's not the code signature. So the user will get, if you're trying to load a system extension, the user will get a GUI prompt. So you need an MDM to whitelist it, even if it's code signed. Like the code signature allows it to run on the system with user approval, but you still need the user approval, which can only be granted by MDM.
So I guess what I'm saying is we should apply for the permission, but we may want to be careful when we start actually signing with that entitlement. Because once we sign with that entitlement, it will trigger user pop-ups unless there's an MDM.
No, so the user pop-ups only happen during runtime when you actually try to load or call those functions.
So you could,
yeah.
So as long as we could just ship it disabled then, for example,
Yes.
and then it would be fine.
Right. So yeah, you could have the user opt-in into that. Yeah, whatever means you want to do that. But right, when the extension would actually try to load on the system and do something, it would check whether it's authorized or not.
Okay, so I think the obvious answer is we should ship it disabled then, and like we do everything else. So okay. Another item that someone added is when we might cut the next release, so release scheduling. So this is milestone 49. It's kind of our current dumping ground for releases.
Yeah, I think some of this might be rolled forward just so we can move ahead. Like
That's what we always do.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
So the thing I would say is we cut the last release on April 15th or so probably actually it's in the April 1st, April 15th month. And we aim to cut a release about every 2 months. So we're kind of about on target to cut the next release now. I think there are a handful of interesting things we should talk about inside a release. And maybe we kick them forward or maybe we don't, but it's always good to talk about. One of the big caveats that's come up in the past is that when we change what we code sign with, that may break some deployments. There's been discussion that some people may pin the deployments to the existing code signature. This is the thing Victor's brought up, so hopefully he can talk about it. So that if we do things like change from the Facebook keys to the Osquery keys, that may merit a major bump, just to make it easier for people to track. I don't really know for sure, or what the messaging is for that, or maybe this is overblown and no one actually cares. I don't know. Okay, maybe no one has any thoughts on that yet. If we cut a new release today, does anyone have any thoughts about whether it's a 4.3.1 or a 4.4.0?
I think when we plan a release, we should always increment the minor. So 4.4.0. If we have to like do an emergency cut, then we should increment the patch.
Okay, accepted. I've updated the milestone.
There's some cool things in there that would be nice to get out in front of people. One is the containerization support. I looked through Stefano's diffs. From the code point of view, they look great. I trust the end-to-end testing, but I didn't have time to set up that environment, even though there are great instructions there myself. I did have some like follow-ups from a developer point of view, how to just make the whole containerizing of tables more easy. Like one, we meta-program the schema so we can create a function that just is like add container columns, and then it adds the 2 columns as an extended schema to Linux, so we don't have to add the code everywhere. And kind of similarly for the tests, like they look like all the test additions are pretty much the same, so we could just abstract that out. But I don't think either of those stops us from releasing and then talking about that new feature so that people can start to give us feedback.
I think that I'd agree with that. My recollection from last meeting too is that we talked about wanting to merge those, but maybe wanting to toggle the fields to hidden first.
Yes.
And I didn't notice if that happened.
Yeah, I did update the 2 PRs, putting the columns hidden and also changing the tests to do test on that, verify that they are hidden, and that they could be later queried.
Cool. So it sounds like all those are really blocked on as just sort of maybe looking at them once more and clicking merge. Sounds like Teddy's pretty happy, and I'm happy to take a look at them, but I don't know if I can spin up a full test environment. Anyone want to say otherwise on those? Otherwise, I'm all for just getting them in. Cool.
The other thing I wanted to bring up, I don't know if we have time for it, but we're very close to having Osquery build not download any artifacts. So I know this is helpful for a couple of people who have mentioned it to me directly, of being able to get clone submodule init and then take what was produced and bring it to another host to build. And the download in the middle has always caused a little bit of complexity for them. So from my understanding, I tried to make some progress on this yesterday in bringing SmartMon tools and SSDeep to being a source build from a legacy Facebook binary only build. Those, I believe, are the last 2 from all 3 platforms. And so the final bit of in-build downloading that happens is one, the OpenSSL formula downloads the OpenSSL tarball. First question is, can we switch that to being a submodule, and so that the formula acts on the submodule checkout? And then the last one that I'm aware of is the Python packages that get brought down. And those happen on their Markdown and their Jinja, which are used to do the table metaprogramming, and those are downloaded on Mac OS, Linux, and Windows. I don't know if we have a solution for that. So my suggestion was, could we stop downloading them and instead host those tarballs somewhere in the repo until we have a solution for that, a better solution for that.
I like this. I've been running into problems with Python failing to download Jinja 2 and markup safe, whatever the other one is. So
We could rewrite those into a Go binary and download the Go binary instead outside of the process. I'm only half kidding, but we've been solving a lot of Python issues here that way. Yeah, I would have no concerns about moving the tooling outside of for those things outside of the build process.
I think there is a concern, like GitHub doesn't want you to use repos to host like backups and just binary content. And I think this is not that case if we wanted to host just tarballs of Python eggs, I think. I don't know Python terminology very well. I've seen quite a few other projects do it, so I don't think we're violating sort of terms of service. But there is a concern that like if we do put tarballs in the repo, then they're kind of forever in the history. So downloading and cloning the repo, which is fast right now, will take a little bit longer, even when we do.
But
it doesn't have to be. I mean, could it be in the Osquery toolchain repo or something?
Meh.
Well, and why not? And why not use submodules for those?
Yeah, better option. Yeah.
Well, I guess the follow-up question that I have is there a reason those things have to happen at runtime as opposed to committing whatever the generated things are and versioning them with Git? Like Python's generating some code from the schemas, right?
The Python generated code is okay. So you're saying that pre-generate that?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that's a big change because Python generates like that's the entire build. Like all the virtual tables go through the generator.
Yeah.
But then we could put that in a submodule and version them properly, separately.
It doesn't solve the problem of anyone who's developing, because we're primarily solving a developer user experience problem. And so anyone that's building new virtual tables will still have to go and set up their Python environment. So instead of having CMake do it for them, they would have to go follow some instructions. And we would have these large schemas committed, which will eventually happen anyway, because we do want to get rid of the metaprogramming. There's like yet another submodule that we eventually delete. Sounds like the least intrusive and easiest way. At least like I could do that in maybe a couple hours, and we could achieve if the OpenSSL is solvable this way too with another submodule. We could get to this like 0 downloaded artifacts during build.
Yeah, I mean, selfishly, that's a critical thing for my organization to be able to build this hermetically.
Yep.
Sort of unrelated to the build thing, but we're depending on OpenSSL. Is there a reason not to depend on boring SSL, or like, is there a reason we need the OpenSSL dependency specifically? Or do we even care?
The idea was to avoid to bring in boring SSL. Depends on Go, if I'm right.
It shouldn't.
Or I mean, I know there's.
It's just a fork with some code removed, I think. And
I would assume that Osquery predates boring SSL, and no one has done the work to see if it's compatible.
Way back, I had done the migration to LibreSSL when boring SSL was just taking off. but I think we switched it back to OpenSSL.
So I know Alessandro, it's not here now. He had a look at it, at various other SSL libraries, mainly because OpenSSL per build system is a bit of a pain point. Though I recall, at least on the test, maybe that it was requiring Go, so we didn't want to bring in another. Basically again another build system or Go itself to build everything. But yeah, I will have to check again with Alessandro. I know he tried, let's say, to integrate it.
Okay.
I mean,
I was
that also Libre SSL, but yeah.
just asking because I want to know if there was any hard dependency in OpenSSL specifically or not. What I have to do is change now, or there's no real reason to.
Yeah, not that I know of.
Okay. Anyone have anything else they want to talk about?
What else? What else?
You getting sleep yet, Teddy?
Always. So I'll do my general like PR or PRs need reviews. If you have time to donate, please review PRs. I think what's helpful is like if you just have 5 or 10 minutes and you can just browse the first page of open PRs and ask yourself like, hey, can I weigh in here? At least like that helps as opposed to waiting for someone to flag their PR in the code review channel on Slack.
Talking about release things for a moment, I will move everything that doesn't look appropriate for 4.4.0 into a future release. It's kind of in the general running release cadence. Feel free to change, argue, adjust it back, yammer at me on Slack, whatever. But I'm just going to shove things around to kind of get us to a stable point there.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for doing that.
I feel like, at least half of these are things I've opened about our build process, so,
Tech debt, right?
Yeah, well.
This has been a very productive office hours recently. I mean, this meeting has been very useful, so I just wanted to, thank you for keeping the agendas going.
Happy to take notes for everyone. Thank you for, all the bits of triage and running and everything else you're doing. So I think there's a lot of stuff we're all doing. It's pretty cool. It's actually great to see so many people here. I think this is the largest office hours we've had in a while. Well,
we at the end?
Sounds that way. Thank you, everyone. And see you all in 2 weeks.
Yeah. Have a good short week, everybody.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.